Let's talk about the 2018 midterms. We've learned over the weekend that officials are planning to close almost all of the polling places in a mostly black part of Georgia, meaning a mostly left-leaning part of Georgia, for the upcoming November midterms. And you might remember some time ago, we covered the story of the Supreme Court killing some parts of the Voting Rights Act. And there was a part of the Voting Rights Act that required pre-clearance when certain states wanted to change things, like exactly what Georgia is doing. And the idea for that pre-clearance rule in the beginning was you have states which historically have not been particularly friendly to the voting rights of individuals, particularly minorities and those who are underprivileged. So if they want to change the rules related to voting, they need to clear those rules in advance. They can't just change them. Supposedly, we didn't need that anymore. And in fact, that was the reason that the Supreme Court struck down certain parts of the Voting Rights Act. They said, we're beyond that phase in American history. Nobody's really going to do this. And then, of course, Georgia does exactly that. We've talked about voter suppression as one of these meta issues, right? Whether you care about the environment, education, social issues, gay rights, whatever. Campaign finance is a meta issue that impacts all political issues. Voter suppression is another one of those. Net neutrality and, of course, climate change are meta issues that influence every political issue. And what we now have found out is that in Randolph County, Georgia, which is more than 60% black, more than 30% in poverty, there are 9 polling places, 7 of which election officials are saying we're going to close. Some of those polling places being closed aren't just 60% black, they are more than 96% black. Now, the explanation from those election officials for closing these aren't, we don't want black people to vote. They would never say that, even if that's the truth. The explanation is that these 7 polling places aren't accessible enough to people with disabilities. And this is like a perfect foil. It's a brilliant justification because they can say, hey, we want ADA accessibility for all these polling places. Some of them aren't ADA accessible, so we're going to shut them down. Now, the ACLU has immediately activated, and they're saying it doesn't matter what reason they give for closing these polling places. This effectively discriminates against black voters and poor voters. If you're poor, you're also less likely to have a car, meaning that you're not going to be able to get to the 2 of 9 polling places that are going to stay open. So let's unravel the logic here, sort of piece by piece. First of all, the claim is 7 polling places aren't ADA compliant, so we're going to shut them down. Okay, number one, it's not news that those 7 polling places aren't ADA compliant. They could have already been fixed, but they weren't. But then we get to the key part. Do you have to close a polling place because it's not ADA compliant? The answer is obviously no. Let's assume you can't make them compliant by election day. It's already almost September. Let's assume that that's true. They're not going to be compliant by the day of the November election. Well, then you can arrange for people to still show up at those polling places. And if they need assistance, if they can't vote there because of the lack of ADA compliance, you bring them to a compliant polling place. Or maybe you make arrangements to have, like if it's stairs that are the problem in the building, you set up outdoor tents where people can vote without having to get a wheelchair up a flight of stairs, for example. Or maybe you get every registered voter an absentee ballot with return postage paid so that they don't need to go to the polling place at all. You don't close the whole thing down. And then, of course, we get to the reality. The reality is that Stacey Abrams is going to be on the ballot in the fall. She's the first black nominee for governor from a major party in Georgia. And lo and behold, immediately, right-wing election officials want to make it more difficult for black people to vote. Shocking that they would try to close down 7 of 9 polling places in one of the few more liberal parts of Georgia, which Obama won in 2008, and Obama won in 2012, and Hillary won over Trump in 2016. And then where do we end back up at? The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, which Donald Trump increasingly controls, the Supreme Court, which previously decided we don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore, or at least certain parts of it, because nobody would try this stuff anymore anyway. And that's why when you hear from people that it doesn't really matter that Trump gets 1, 2, however many Supreme Court picks he's ultimately going to get, this is why it matters, because Supreme Courts regularly make decisions. And then we sort of forget about it. And then a couple years go by, and then all of a sudden, 7 of 9 polling places in a Democratic African-American poor area of Georgia, which could maybe lead to a Democratic Georgia governor, get closed down, and we don't have that pre-clearance law anymore. This is why this stuff matters.
Yeah, this is what Republicans are good at, fighting dirty, right? Whether it's gerrymandering or voter suppression, this is just what they do.
Right.
And it's because they can't win the hearts and minds of voters. It looks like there will be a blue wave in 2018, although we don't know for sure. Their president isn't very popular. Their ideas aren't very popular. So this is what they have to go with. This is what they have to resort to.
Yeah, and meanwhile, on the West Coast, which is not in play for Republicans, it's vote by mail with automatic voter registration. Here in Massachusetts, our Republican governor, Charlie Baker, just signed into law automatic voter registration when you get your driver's license. In places where you can win with these methods, you see them actually used. In places where one side or the other is holding a very, very clear advantage, all of a sudden automatic voter registration or vote by mail or more polling places or early voting isn't controversial anymore. This is why it matters. And, I talk about this every couple months, whether we're close to an election or not. And every time I talk about it, I say, if we wait until 2 months before the election, it's probably too late. And that's probably the case here, although hopefully the ACLU will be able to do something about it. But the problem is, even when I badger the audience about it, 2 years out from an election, it doesn't seem as urgent because we've still got 2 years. And it's this catch-22 where we can't seem to get anything done. Follow the show on Instagram. If you are not following David Pakman Show on Instagram, you are not getting behind-the-scenes pictures. You are not getting your questions answered by me multiple times per week. We're taking audience questions on Instagram. So please follow the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can also follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Very, very exciting stuff going on there. I am thrilled to tell you that today's episode is sponsored in part by Blinkist.com/Pakman. Blinkist is a really unique service for your phone, tablet, and web browser, and it is incredibly useful for people like me who love books and learning but are busy. Blinkist takes the best and most popular nonfiction books and condenses them into 15-minute audiobooks. I'm sure that if you're like me, you have a very long list of books that you've been meaning to read. You only have so many hours in the day, and that's why Blinkist is so amazing. They take the most important information, the themes, the insights from each book, and they distill it into a 15-minute audiobook that you can listen to in one sitting. I've listened to a ton of books on Blinkist. Our audience can get a 7-day free trial by going to Blinkist.com/Pakman. If you're watching on YouTube, I put a link in the description. I have listened to Blinkist books about economics, about political science, about history, about science, so many interesting things. And after the free trial, if you like it, you can continue enjoying thousands of condensed audiobooks for about $5 a month. Go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. That's BLINKIST.com/PAKMAN.